Welcome back. We were talking before the break about justice and how everyone kind of defines justice differently. And you said you felt like a lot of victims don't feel like they ever get justice because justice would be what they were before the crime happened to them.
Yeah, that's true. And you're never going to get that old life back. Everything that you knew is gone, and you're going to have to rebuild a new normal. And it takes a lot of energy to do that. And you know, I know we've talked a little bit about counseling, but counseling is so important. You know, there's something about saying your pain out loud, or maybe even writing it down. It doesn't change anything, except it lightens your load a little bit so that you can get through the day. And so for any victims out there that are suffering and just feel so hopeless, you know, especially if you're in Davidson County, there are lots of the Family Justice Center is amazing, and the Family Intervention Program is a counseling service that's a free service. It's only for victims of crime. They specifically know the trauma impact for victimization. They are angels. Call the Family Justice Center. And if you're a victim of domestic violence, that's such a complicated crime, and for the victim, they absolutely need guidance and counseling, and there's a free counseling service at the Family Justice Center. Take that bold step and make that call. You know, you don't have anything to lose, really. You have everything to gain. You know, your peace of mind and can be regained. Your inner joy that has been crushed can eventually be restored. But it just is a long, long process.
In your experience, you guys said that one of the offenders said, in my 25 years in prison, I never thought about the victim.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, I think for a lot of, I think it's just human behavior. I mean, honestly, I think when we do things to somebody else, we are doing them out of our own place of hurt and anger, trauma. I mean, whatever words. I mean, I think you could apply this, you know, I think you could apply that thought to even young children. You know, you have two siblings, one snatches something out of the other person's hand, they snatch it because they believe they're entitled to it. You know, there's anger involved because they feel like they were unjustly wronged on the front end, and so they're taking something back. You know, it's that kind of thing. And so I think as adults, if that behavior does not get addressed as we are developing, we just take that into adulthood. And in a lot of these cases, and this is not to make any excuses, I don't believe in excuses. I believe that we need to have explanations for behavior. But at the end of the day, none of us have the right to say, well, somebody else hurt me, and therefore I have the right to hurt somebody else. What we have the right to do is to take what has happened to us and address that and heal that, but we don't have the right to hurt somebody else over that. And unfortunately, what we have are prisons full of individuals who have been hurt by others, who have now taken that hurt and they are unleashing it on their victims. And it's easier, human behavior, is if we just ignore that. Like, I mean, if I have hurt somebody, the individual who talked about that, I can't remember if it was murder or robbery. It was murder. You know, so it's a high-level crime, you know, that we're talking about there. Huge devastation, and until they get to victim impact, you know, they have not really thought about their victim. And I think it's just easier. I think it's easier to go through life not thinking about the people that we have caused harm to.
And that is human nature. And none of us want to do that.
Right. And I think it's easier for us to try to justify them when we're forced to. So that justification begins to look like what? Like, well, I did this because they did this, or I did this because this has happened to me, or you don't really know pain. You think that's pain? That's not really pain. And so they begin to believe their own lies and mentality. And so when that statement was stated, that was 14 years ago. That was in one of our very first victim impact classes. It was such an awakening for Verna and I, because as advocates, we work with that pain all the time. And it was almost unfathomable to think that anybody could serve time in prison and not be thinking about their victim. And what we have learned over the years that's usually what's happening. Until somebody comes in and says to them, you really need to be thinking about your victim, they are not.
Why would they? They're thinking about, I don't like the guard, I hate the food, I can't see my girlfriend, my mom's passed away and I can't go to that's the thing. They're thinking about their daily moment by moment life incarcerated. They're not thinking about their victim.
Right. Well, we've even had inmates who have told us that they don't have victims because they have killed their victims. I mean, so they just, they're not even thinking. They're just like, I don't even have a victim. I don't even know why I would need to be here in this victim impact class because my victim is dead. And then when you've asked them how the victim is dead, it's because they killed the victim. And it's just like,
how about the ripple effect? How about the people that loved the victim? There was another young man who told Valerie after he'd taken our class, he did not like being in our class, and we realized most of the time we cover a segment on child sex abuse, and he hated that segment, and he disclosed to Valerie that had happened to him. But at the end of the class, of all of the classes, he told Valerie he'd lived his whole life with the advice from his brother, who told him to treat everybody like they just raped your mom. That's how he'd lived his life.
Wow. It's something no one wants to talk about, child abuse, and you always hear that the abused become the abuser. Do you guys think that is really true?
For crime in general,
I
don't think it's necessarily true for sex offenses, but hurt people hurt people. I used to hate that. It used to infuriate me as a victim and as an advocate. Hurt people hurt people. I don't want to hear any excuses. I have a pressing need after 14 years of teaching victim impact. Valerie and I believe that hurt people do hurt people, and we're not paying attention to it. So incarceration is not necessarily a bad thing. People are saying, oh, we need to shorten the sentences. No, what we need to do is we need to do something while the people are incarcerated. When somebody is raped, or somebody is kidnapped, or when somebody is beaten up, or when somebody has a loved one murdered, we immediately rush out to offer support, because we know what the long-term impact is for the victim if they don't get the help. We know. And yet we have prisons full of people that have layer upon layer upon layer of victimization that is not being addressed. And so we're incarcerating them. We're doing nothing with what we know what their issues are. And then we're kind of putting them in this environment that's an incubator for more crime. And then what that's doing, it's creating a generational march to prison, because they're taking that home to their family and they're taking it out to all of us. So what we're doing in our prisons is really important. And, and Valerie and I believe that we're not doing the right things.
When prisoners go to sit in your victim impact classes, what do they look like? Kind of, how do you structure it?
So the classes are there are 10 topics that are covered, and the classes, it just kind of depends on how much time we have at any given facility. We have done victim impact classes where we were able to get through all 10 topics. We have done other victim impact classes where we kind of hit our big 3 or 4. The big 3 is accountability, is helping them truly understand that accountability is not the same thing as responsibility. That is a huge issue in our society anyways, that responsibility is really simply just saying, I've done it. Accountability is understanding the impact behind it. It's the difference between a child saying, I'm sorry because they've been told to say that they're sorry, and a child saying, I'm sorry because I know that when I did this, then this is how that impacted you. We always make sure to cover domestic violence. It is our opinion that violence in the home is probably the #1 reason for all of the society issues that we have. And I know that's a really broad, sweeping kind of statement, but it goes back to what you opened up with in this particular segment, from the concept of, if we are teaching children that it is okay to cause harm to those that you claim that you love, physically, emotionally, financially, sexually, whatever that kind of looks like, if we are teaching children that, it is baffling to me why we are so surprised that they would go to school and bully people. it's baffling to me that we are so surprised that they would grow up and do the same thing to their families, teaching the next generation how to do the same thing. And then we're all looking around like, how did we get here? How are we so?
Why wouldn't they take it out to the street?
Right, because if you're doing it in private, you know, you're going to take it out into the public.
With people
That's
that
just
you
how
love.
that kind of works.
With people that you love.
Right. So we always make sure to cover domestic violence. Domestic violence is always an interesting topic, though, with our inmates, because domestic violence is so normalized for the vast majority of them. Many of them have grown up in homes where the domestic violence that they experienced is very extreme, and to them it's just normal. So if your loved one says something that you don't like, it's perfectly acceptable to hit them, because that's just what you literally know. It's just a normal way of dealing with inter family disagreements, those kinds of things. So domestic violence often takes us a while to get through, because we have to get through what they're viewing as normal and then begin to set up, well, how do you actually approach this in a different way? And then child abuse is the other one. Child abuse is significant from both sides of the fence. And what I mean by that is that many of them were raised in abusive environments. Once again, it does not excuse any behavior, but they do have to understand how that is impacting their current parenting decisions. Many of them struggle with appropriate boundaries. And as you know, children are boundary pushers by nature. And so how do they parent in light of that? And how are they going to break the cycle? Because all of them will tell you that they love their children. All of them will tell you that they do not want the behavior to continue. But then they pull up short with how knowing to actually stop the behavior. So child abuse is a huge one for us to work through. And of course, there's lots of disclosures in terms of things that have happened to them. And in some of these cases, we actually have individuals who are there because of those charges as well. So it just kind of depends on the makeup of the class and who's sitting in there at any given point.
If you are a victim looking for answers, we'll have more coming up from our guests after the break.